Patrick, thanks for joining me today. Patrick is the founder of Pod, which is an AI tool. I love it. It's an AI tool for sellers in complex sales cycles. So a lot of times that's your B2B sellers that are doing enterprise, mid-market. Great to have you. I'd love to hear more about what you're doing with Pod.
First of all, thank you so much for having me on. I'm super excited about the conversation. So I'm Patrick. I'm the founder of Pod. Pod, in a nutshell, is an AI deal coach, deal intelligence platform for B2B sellers. Like you rightfully mentioned, we really focus on full cycle sellers that are working on very complex selling motion, right? Mid-market, enterprise, where you have long sales cycle, large buying committee, high ACV type deals. And what we've realized is that a lot of reps end up making mistakes and losing deals because they lack the guidance and the know-how, so to speak, on how to navigate these complex deals. They don't engage with the right stakeholders. They don't prioritize the right deal. They don't know how to engage with these stakeholders. They drop the ball on day-to-day deal execution, and that ultimately leads to a lot of missed opportunities, so to speak, and a lower win rate in many situations. So we think that's like a very important problem, and it's, at the end of the day, especially for these enterprise AEs, it's an effectiveness problem. Are they making the right decisions at the right time in the right way? So ultimately, what we're building at Pod is the equivalent of the virtual, top sales performer that we can get by the sides of the rep and guide them on the best actions to take to close deals faster. That's what it is in essence. And I think the way that we do this is that we connect with their existing data, their CRM, email, calendar, call recording tools, social media data. We pull all that in, and then we're able to tell them, hey, here are the specific deals you should be focused on, and here's specifically what we think you should do on this deal to improve your likelihood of winning it and winning it faster. So it's super fun. It's very interesting. It's not about automation. It's about, like I mentioned, effectiveness, helping them make better, faster, and smarter kind of decisions in their day-to-day. And I really, really think, Royce, that there's a lot of value that is not being captured for organization. There's so much money being spent on generating leads, right? With prospecting or like intent data in the top of the funnel. There's so much money being spent there. And then when a lead is qualified, it's kind of thrown on the lap of an account executive, and not as much effort and thoughtfulness and investment is being put into converting them. So it's basically, in many organizations, a lot of them are basically throwing money into a leaky bucket. And we think that's like a huge, huge opportunity for organization to create more sustainable growth. So anyways, like big problem, fun problem, very top of mind for many sales leaders. And we're trying to do something cool with it, leveraging artificial intelligence, obviously.
Yeah, well, that's super cool. And I think that, strikes a particular nerve with me. You mentioned, companies are spending a ton of money on lead generation. And I think about the life cycle of the salesperson, right? So you often start out as a BDR or SDR, and you're the one that's like doing that frontline lead gen. And then you hand it off to an AE, and you're like, man, I wish, someday I'm going to be that AE, right?
Yeah.
But, how do you develop those skills? And I love that you are giving that kind of deal coaching. And I imagine, like, a lot of times, SDRs, BDRs are doing a lot of the similar motions as your AE as well. So, like, what are the important things? Like, who am I talking to? I know I've talked to AEs before. I won't say who. But, AEs before, they're like, oh, my SDR is an idiot. Like, they're talking to the wrong person entirely. And it's like, just tell them that, like.
Exactly. Get that. Yeah. Share the best practices. And I think what's interesting is whether you talk to BDRs who are transitioning into an AE role or more junior AEs or AEs that are in a new business, I think a lot of what makes, in many situations, a President's Club performer is that know-how, that pattern recognition of understanding, okay, well, in this situation, I should talk to this type of person, say this type of thing. And I think Pod is, my perspective, a great use case for these, to get these younger reps or BDRs that are transitioning into A roles to kind of ramp up faster and, act, think, and sell like a top performer from day one. So yeah, I think there's, that's the normal journey to get to an account executive role, right? You have to start by pounding the phone and sending emails as a BDR, but that transition to AE shouldn't be left to luck, right? It's not just like, hey, well, I'll figure it out now. And we think that technology can do a great job at helping them.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that I love about Pod, you demoed this for me a while ago, but I think most of us come to sales with our own particular framework, right? Is it MedPick? Is it spin selling? Is it Sandler selling? Whatever it is, or most of us, like, it's a mix of everything, right? It's a little bit of this and that.
Good old custom one.
Yeah, exactly. And what I like about your tool is it actually has frameworks that you can utilize and see, like, okay, what am I missing in this particular deal? What am I missing for my spin selling or challenger sale? What are the particular things I need to track down? So I love that. I love that tool.
Yeah, I think sales methodology frameworks become very important when you're in the territories of more complex deals, because it's not a recipe to follow. Right. There's a lot more nuances to how to navigate that deal, and whether it is a qualification framework or a way to discovery framework later on in the sales cycle. I think that many organizations know that those are great. Yeah, everyone's heard of MedPick or Spiced or Spin or Bend. They've all heard of it, but oftentimes, and they're going to train their team on it. And then they are basically going to add fields in their Salesforce or their CRM to fill up. And that's pretty much it, right? Like, okay, cool. We've implemented the sales methodology framework. But at the end of the day, when you talk to reps on the ground and even first line managers, they're like, well, I don't trust the data that's in there. I don't really use it. It's kind of basically just a rule that it needs to be filled in to move to another stage. But the reality is that a sales methodology framework has to be used kind of in game, right? Like in the moment to guide the rep. That's what it's like, before a call or after a call, or to diagnose the health or the progress of a deal. And I think one thing, like you've rightfully mentioned, with framework analysis, really think about pod coaching as a way to operationalize, so to speak, these frameworks, make them helpful for the rep when they're looking at a deal or before a call to know what to say. And I think whether it is, again, MedPicks by Spin or your own custom ones, Pod is able to tell you, hey, well, for each of the letters in your sales methodology framework, how well have you covered it? What have you discussed so far? And most importantly, what are next step or suggested things that you should be aiming to better understand on this deal to increase or improve your understanding of this one topic? And I think that's what differentiates just a cool framework for the sake of it, and actually being helpful and helping reps to be more thoughtful in their approach to the deal. So I'm a big fan of frameworks. I think that a lot of people know about them. A lot of people want to use them. I think very few organizations leverage them correctly, or to their, I don't want to say correctly, to their full potential.
Well, that's an interesting topic. I think about salespeople. A lot of times we're very, there's a lot of personality that comes into that. A lot of like grit and determination. A lot of I think improvisation as well. So I think a lot, a lot of us are like, hey, like I just got to go out and get it done. However I have to get it done. So layering on a framework, helps guide and refine that kind of chaos that people like myself can bring into those conversations sometimes.
Yeah, but I think that's the reality. It shouldn't be intention to that very natural, organic, let's try to hustle and figure it out type of mentality. I think it has to be, it's in tandem, right? It's like, hey, within the compound of like either a process or a methodology or an approach, then like you have as a rep the responsibility to build that rapport, to build trust, to ask the right questions at the right time, to listen actively. Like that remains the same. The objective of a framework isn't to, get you to look at a paper and just pound the questions one at a time in a very robotic way, right? People end up buying from people. And if they feel like they're just the buyers being shoved through a sales methodology framework, they'll react negatively and you're most likely going to lose the deal. So I think I like to think about it as both that characteristic that make a lot of great salespeople great with the framework as being kind of synergetic, so to speak. It helps them to kind of to focus a lot of that energy in a way that will push the deal forward, and not just a way to to build great rapport and relationship, which is great, but has to be in the right direction,
Right.
or else the deal, you'll build a great relationship, but you won't close great deals.
Yeah. Well, it's like the the old idea of like a plan is worthless, but planning is invaluable, right? So it's like I know where I want to get. Like I don't have to like hit 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in that order, in the first 5 minutes.
Yeah,
But
exactly.
like I still have to get to that end goal. So being having flexibility around that framework of like we still have to land the plane in the same way, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
And
either
I
way.
know which direction I need to take, but I'm not bound to like follow it to the letter every single conversation. So I think that's why we can debate about artificial intelligence in sales for 1,000 years, Royce, but maybe in 1,000 years it's all going to be robots and it's going to be a non-debate. But as of right now, like the debate between automation versus augmentation, I'm not going to argue for BDRs or more transactional sales. I think it's very different. In the case of more complex selling motions, I think human is always going to play an important role. You're not signing $1 million contract with an automated robot. You're talking to someone, you have to look at them in the eye, build trust, build rapport, build a partnership. And I think that's where AI is used to make that job easier so that the rep can focus on the truly human part of their work more often, or a bigger percentage of their time. So
Yeah.
I think that's what's exciting about it.
I love that, and I'm in total agreement with that. Like I tell people, I'm like, until we have robots buying this stuff, we need human selling, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, right? It's not going to be human to robot interface. It has to be either robot to robot or human to human.
Yeah, exactly. So like,
That's
you can inform the human, and I think that there are things that bots can do in sales. Maybe if you have like a very transactional sell, like I go to Amazon, I buy stuff without talking to anybody, like whatever.
Yeah.
I didn't buy my house that way though. But like, I can do research on my house. I can get estimates. I can get comparisons of my house's value to the one next to it versus what they're asking. Like I can do all these things, by myself with a bot.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, like I want to look the person in the eye and try to figure out like,
Take that hand. Yeah.
what are they lying to me about? What are can we make a deal here? Because I whatever you're asking, I don't want to give you. So like,
100%.
we gotta. It's still human to human.
Absolutely. 100% agree.
Right on. Well, Patrick, how did you get into this? Like, you clearly have a lot of thoughts about sales, a lot of expertise that you've turned into a product. Like, how did you end up where you are?
A big part of my career has been at the intersection of go-to-market and product management. That I think has been quite interesting. Initially, when I was in the consulting world, I looked at go-to-market at a very macro level, understanding how the different pieces fit together, from marketing, sales, customer success, and then afterwards joined a startup, and it was at the ground level, basically doing go-to-market operations. I was also selling. It was a startup, so had to roll up your sleeves and get things done no matter what. And that's where I got very good exposure to, I guess, the pains of enterprise account executives, what made it difficult as a job, and what were perhaps the areas for improvement, or areas where we could get teams to more systematically kind of perform or be more effective. And I just thought that it was like a super interesting problem to solve because it's very nuanced. It's also a very difficult problem to solve because there's a human aspect to it. But that's when I decided to start Pod. And I think that's been, to be very honest, I've also learned a lot in the past, 3 years. Talking to sales leaders, sales reps, revenue enablement folks, rev ops people, talking to different stakeholders in the sales world. And over 3 years, talking to them and understanding their problems and scratching your head to trying to figure out like, how am I going to solve this for them, gets you to put a lot of thought into or try to develop a very good understanding of what's actually going on the ground, and build a perspective on how things can be better for folks. So
yeah, that's awesome, and that's kind of what got me into sales. Like I've always worked in small companies, so like that roll up your sleeves, be flexible, do whatever needs to be done mentality. Like I find that invigorating because it's like there's always something new, there's always something different, and you have to put your thinking cap on, right? Like you have to be flexible and get after it, and that's very interesting. Like I'm sure that in your sales career, like you've tackled particular things, learned particular things, but then like as you are trying to implement that for other people, are like, oh, you don't do it that way. Like, okay, like
exactly. I mean, that was when I first was thinking about this problem to solve. The first thing I did was talk to 50 to 100 different account executives, people that I knew, people that I didn't know. I reached out to a bunch of folks, had a 30-minute conversation. Basically, the agenda was, tell me about your work, right? What's keeping you up at night? What is getting you to pull your hair out? And the first conclusion was like, holy shit, pardon my language, but everyone kind of has their different approach, right? And I think that's what makes it very interesting as a product category, generally speaking, sales tech, is that you have to, it can be rigid because number one is going to sell or have different workflows than number two. But I think after these 100 conversation, you kind of identify kind of a common ground across all of them, even if they do something a bit different. Like a lot of them leverage a sales methodology framework. A lot of them think very actively about their buying committee. A lot of them spend a bit of their time trying to do housekeeping work with their CRM. So like those are things that even if people do it slightly differently, is common to all of them and ends up being like a center point to the platform that we built. Say like, okay, well, if we are to affect change amongst reps, like it has to be in these ways, because everyone, irrespectively of whether you sell, nuclear submarine or an MRI machine or software, sales has these common elements to it. You try to identify people to talk to, identify if they're the right fit, try to understand their needs, their pain points, their concern, try to qualify the deal, and then ultimately try to push the deal forward. Like those are things that are true irrespective of the type of sales that you do. So yeah, the biggest conclusion was like, it is very different, and from my own experience, but also from one company to another.
Sure. Well, why don't you unpack for us, a couple of things that you've learned along the way? Like, you've talked about like, okay, there's so different methodologies, but what are a few key things that you've learned, kind of in the sales operations world along the way here?
Yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you.
There's three. I mean, there's a few things, but there are some of the biggest learnings I've had. The first one I'll show doesn't really relate to sales ops specifically, but is more from a product development and problem solving perspective. Is over time I've learned that everyone should spend a lot more time than you think defining the problem you're trying to solve before jumping into the solution, because the solution, once you've really well understood and defined the problem, the solution is going to be much easier to define. And I think it kind of relates to my last point, is like spending the time to understand, what is the challenge or the pain that is worth solving in enterprise sales is very interesting. And whether it's like a project internally, I bring that learning to the table. And I think that many organizations, and I think it's true for RevOps as well, when it comes to like implementing new process or implementing a new tool, a lot of organizations are going to start with a solution. Like, hey, I found this great tool, I want to apply it. But I encourage a lot of companies whether it's about using pod or not, is like, hey, let's take a step back here. Like, what is it that you're trying to solve? What is the problem statement that is worth solving? What's the value of it? And now let's talk about solution. And, the solution might be, the initial hypothesis might be the right one, or it might not be. But I think that's, that's something very overarching that over my career as a whole, but especially since starting Pod, I've learned a lot. So that's number one.
That's great, and I talk to a lot of people in the SaaS world. I'm in the Salesforce world, but also talking to folks like yourself who have a product that can connect to Salesforce and make it more, even more valuable, right? Your value added product here. But I talk to a lot of sales teams that are like, okay, we need people that are, really kind of taking a consultative approach. I think that's what they're getting at, it right? Is okay, like, I'm here to sell you Salesforce. I'm here to sell you Pod or whatever it may be. Like, that's transparent, but why? Like, what are you actually going to do for me? And, really digging in on that. And I know that I've been in parts of conversations where I've had a client who's like, I want to talk about buying this thing. And I'm like, why? And they're like, well, I don't know. And like, we're talking around things and it's like, I'm just kind of interested. I'm like, like, I can't help you buy that unless I know what you're actually trying to do. And there's always
I'm gonna take your money if you give it to me, but perhaps let's try to go a few.
And you can make sales that way. Like, it does work, but you end up with an unhappy client because they're like, I overbought because they didn't understand what they wanted, or a lot of times people are like, tell me the art of the possible. So again, that's where that consultation comes from, is like, I've seen people do X, Y, and Z. Can I paint that picture for you so that you do get the most out of it? Yeah,
absolutely. I guess second learning for me, and I alluded to it a bit earlier, but I think the one thing that I've realized is the best sales reps or account executives in B2B sales are ones that are very intentional and, I'd say to an extent, obsessed with their buying committee in every deal. Like, they're very thoughtful about it. They don't just like walk into it and navigate willy-nilly, but they put a lot of thought into who should be on the buying committee. Do I have the right people? How are they engaged, right? Are they on board? Do they have concerns? Do they have areas for areas of excitement, etc.? And then, like, what should I do or say, or how can I leverage it to ultimately push the deal forward? And I think that's very interesting. I think a lot of companies are going to stay at the first level and say like, oh, well, our ICP is a director of IT, or, hey, we sell into marketing, so the VP of marketing is the ICP. Well, when you sell a 6-figure contract or 7-figure contract, there's a lot more than that person involved, and they ultimately have a lot of influence into whether or not it's going to close. You can think about legal, IT, procurement, name it, right? Finance is another big one. And I think that a lot of the best sales reps out there are going to be very, very thoughtful and deliberate and intentional about that. Like, trying to understand and map the buying committee, try to understand, okay, well, what is the sentiment of each of them? What are their concerns? How do I build the business case for each kind of department that is involved? Because ultimately you might be selling to the VP of marketing, but you have to build a business case for IT to be on board. You have to build a business case for finance. You have to bring on board legal. And I think that's been a biggest learning for me of what differentiates the top sellers from maybe the less performing sellers, but ultimately it's enabled by the organization and how they think about their processes. So as an example, we worked with a small team. There were 5 AEs 2 months ago, started working with them. And I think one of the things they really liked about Pod is this thing that we call like contact sentiment. So you're able to see your buying committee and learning from all your discussion, all your emails, all your notes. It's able to tell you like, hey, well, John here has a positive sentiment that is trending down, and you have Anna here who has a neutral sentiment trending up. that helps reps to be a lot more thoughtful and see around the corner to say, well, okay, well, I need to talk to John here because John is my decision maker, and it's, you know, his sentiment is trending down. And I think that's how that obsession over the buying committee and ends up having a huge impact on your ability to close the deal, because you've probably heard that story 1,000 times, but someone try to sell thinks they're, you know, 90% of the way, and then at the 11th hour procurement jumps in and derails the deal, right? I think that's a behavior from a rep that doesn't necessarily is as thoughtful about the buying committee and optimizing it. I think that to me has been super interesting, and that just reinforces the reason why sales ends up being, or at least, you know, enterprise or mid-market sales ends up being like a very intrinsically human craft. And it's like it ends up being about people, and people buy from people, so et cetera. So that's kind of, I think, a second big learning for me in the past few years about enterprise sales, and something that I think a lot of sales op organization can enable their team to do more of.
Yeah, and I love that as well. You know, talking about, you know, do we have the right people on our buying committee? Because, you know, as you mentioned, you have your kind of ICP profile, but, you know, it differs from company to company. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a local Fortune 500 company that I know, and their management is like, man, it's like a bowl of spaghetti. Like, I know people that are like very high level leadership there, and I'm like, so who is the person here? And they're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, just tell me the title. And they're like, it doesn't work that way. I'm like, it doesn't work that way. Like, what do you mean? So it's like, wow, okay, that's difficult. So like, you know, being able to, you know, you can't always tell that from the outside, but, you know, once you get into an organization and you get, you know, kind of find the champion of your deal, you know, can you have them fill in the gaps? And I had a sales coach at one point, and his tip was like, if you want to figure out a org structure, you know, just like say things that are wrong. You're like, oh, so you report up to like Janice over here? No. I report and she reports to Janice, and Janice reports to cool.
Nice.
Like, oh, that's money.
I think
there.
I'm a very data driven, and Rose, I think you as well, very very data driven guy, and I think there's a lot that can be learned from historical deals. You know, if you look at 1,000 deals that your company has closed in the past, identify, you know, create pockets of organization or deals that have similar characteristics. I don't know, it could be the size of the deal, the geography, the type of industry that you sold into, type of product that you sold, whatever it might be. And then you look at trends within these companies. Like, hey, well, which ones have closed, and who did they involve in the buying committee, and which one lost, and who was involved then? And if you're able to compare that, you're actually able, even if, yes, every organization is unique, like it gives you a very objective way to understand, well, hey, this might be a trend worth investigating in that one deal, because I know that in 90% of the deals that are similar to the one I'm working on right now, a VP of procurement was involved at this point in the stage. And I think that's it goes back to like marrying the data to the human aspect of it. It just gives more ammunition to an account executive to be able to like be very intentional when they go out there and try to, you know, talk to their prospects. So I'd say that even if, you know, I similar to you, I've heard 1,000 times, no, but this deal is very unique. No, it's not. You know, no, it's not. You know, there's foundationally, or there might be elements that are unique to every organization, but, you know, if you look at a large enough data set, and you look at, you have enough statistical relevance in your data set, then you're able to like draw very interesting insights. So I think it's very interesting to bring that angle to the reps. And a lot of them, you know, they see that and they're like, well, yeah, actually, yeah, that was someone that had a decision-making power in this company. And that's where you see the magic, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, Patrick, what's next for Pod? Where can people find you? What should we be looking for? Give us more information about what you're doing.
A lot of cool things. We're onboarding new clients. as we speak. A lot of new product launches that we've done recently, and a lot of cool things happening in the next few months, including integration with new data providers on the call recording side, on the CRM side. So we're working hard to bring on board new companies and ultimately make them more performant and happy. So if anyone's out there is kind of looking to bring a deal intelligence platform to their team, should definitely reach out, through our website, workwithpod.com, or on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active. I try to share my opinion, maybe a bit too much according to my girlfriend, but try to share my opinion and thoughts on anything sales. So Patrick Monnot on LinkedIn, reach out, DM me. I love talking about this stuff. So
right on.
I do it for a living.
Well. You have a podcast as well, so
yeah, on YouTube as well, on Pod Workspace on YouTube. So we love talking to revenue leaders, rev ops leaders, fractional sales leaders, sales reps, about what sales is for them and what they've learned over time. So a lot of great content out there that we put our heart into. So
fantastic. Well, I appreciate it. I love what you're doing at Pod. I love what you're doing with your content. And thanks for sharing with us today. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the conversation, Royce.
Thanks, Patrick.